She returned to the mansion seeking only peace, but found a frail elderly woman surrounded by false affection. The master's new fiancée, charming at first glance, hid intentions as cold as her smile. When small accidents began to repeat, the caregiver realized nothing there was by chance, and by saving the matriarch from a deadly trap, she exposed a truth everyone refused to see. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. And now, on with the story. The rain hammered against the taxi's windshield with an intensity that seemed to echo the frantic beating of Megan Davis's heart. At 28, she had learned to control her emotions in extreme situations. 7 years as an FDNY paramedic had taught her that. But in that moment, with her hands trembling slightly on her duffel bag, she felt like a lost child. The wrought-iron gate of the Harrison estate appeared before her like a vision from the past. The same rose bushes her mother, Eleanor, had tended with such care still adorned the entrance, though they were more lush now. Megan took a deep breath, the familiar scent mixing with the smell of rain. 17 years. It had been 17 years since she had last left this place, carrying only a suitcase and a heart shattered by her mother's passing. "This is it, miss?" the driver asked, eyeing the imposing property in the rearview mirror. Megan nodded, unable to trust her own voice. She paid the fare and stepped out, feeling the cold rain soak her brown hair. The black jacket she wore, the same one she used during night shifts in the ambulance, now seemed out of place. She wasn't here as paramedic Megan Davis, the strong woman who saved lives in the early mornings of New York City. She was here as the cook's daughter, who had once run through the gardens of this very estate. When she pressed the doorbell, the familiar chime echoed through the inner corridors, awakening an avalanche of memories. Her mother's voice calling her for dinner, the smell of chocolate cake fresh from the oven the summer, afternoons playing with little Sophia in the garden. Sophia, Mr. Richard Harrison's granddaughter, who was now 21, and probably didn't even remember the girl who had been her childhood companion. The door swung open, revealing Martha, the housekeeper who had been with the family for over 3 decades. The 60-year-old woman's face lit up with genuine surprise and joy. "Megan! Oh my goodness, look at you!" Martha enveloped her in a tight hug, not caring about the rain. "What a beautiful woman you've become, just like your mother, but with this strength in your eyes that reminds me of..." "Reminds you of who, Martha?" Megan asked, discreetly wiping away a tear that had escaped. "Of Mr. Harrison himself when he was young. That determination, you know. Come in, you'll catch pneumonia in this rain." The interior of the mansion was as majestic as Megan remembered, but something had changed. The paintings on the walls were different, more modern. The scent of lavender that had always characterized the house now mingled with a more sophisticated, colder perfume. As she passed the kitchen, Megan felt a pang in her chest. The marble countertop where her mother had prepared meals was immaculate, but it was empty of the joy it used to hold. "Mr. Harrison is in his study," Martha whispered, as if sharing a secret. "Vivian went out to run some errands in the city. He'll be so happy to see you." Megan hesitated. Richard Harrison was 55 now, and according to the rare phone calls she'd had with Martha over the years, had become an even more successful businessman. The difference was that he was now engaged to Vivian Monroe, a 38-year-old woman Megan only knew from photos in society magazines. Walking down the hall that led to the study, Megan looked at the family photographs on the walls. She recognized some faces, but others were completely new. One photo caught her eye. Richard standing next to a blonde child of about 4, both smiling on a playground. The little girl had the same blue eyes as Richard, and was holding an ice cream cone while he watched her with paternal tenderness. "That's Emma," a voice said from behind her. Megan turned to find Richard Harrison standing in the doorway of his study. The years had been kind to him, a few silver strands at his temples, wrinkles that denoted experience, but the same warm smile she remembered from her childhood. "My daughter." "Your daughter?" Megan couldn't hide her surprise. "Vivian had her from a previous relationship. I officially adopted her last year." He stepped closer, and Megan noticed something different in his eyes, a subtle sadness that hadn't been there when she was a child. "Megan Davis. How many times I've thought of you over the years. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." The comment about Eleanor hit Megan like a punch to the gut. The tears came without warning, and she found herself wrapped in a fatherly embrace that awakened a longing she had tried to bury for years. "Why did you come back, Megan?" Richard asked gently, leading her to the leather sofa in his study. Megan took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. How could she explain that 3 weeks ago she had lost a 5-year-old patient in a traffic accident? How could she tell him that she hadn't been able to sleep since, that every siren made her relive that moment? How could she admit that the accident had made her question everything? Her career, her choices, her identity. I need some time away from New York," she managed to say. "A place to find myself again." Richard nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "This has always been your home, Megan. You know that." Just then, the front door burst open, followed by the sound of high heels clicking on the marble floor of the foyer. A feminine voice, melodious but with an underlying chill, echoed through the house. "Richard, where are you? We need to talk about Emma's birthday party." Megan saw Richard's face tense slightly. He stood up, smoothing his suit. "Vivian's home," he murmured. "Come, I want you to meet her." As they walked toward the main hall, Megan couldn't have imagined that this moment would mark the beginning of a silent battle that would not only test her emotional strength, but also reveal secrets that could destroy the family she had loved so much as a child. Vivian Monroe appeared at the entrance to the living room like an apparition from a fashion magazine. Blonde, elegant, in a dress that probably cost 3 months of Megan's salary, she radiated confidence and sophistication. But when her eyes met Megan's, something cold flickered in the woman's light blue gaze. "Vivian, this is Megan Davis," Richard said, making the introductions with a genuine smile. "Eleanor's daughter. Remember I told you about her." The smile that appeared on Vivian's face was perfect, calculated, measured, completely artificial. "Of course. The cook's daughter." She extended a hand with studied delicacy. "What a coincidence you'd show up today of all days." Megan shook the offered hand, immediately noticing the coldness of her touch and the tone of voice that turned coincidence into something almost accusatory. In that handshake, she instinctively understood that her presence here would not be welcomed by everyone. "Megan's back too. Spend some time with us," Richard explained, seemingly oblivious to the tension that had settled in the room. "How wonderful," Vivian replied, but her eyes said the exact opposite. "I'm sure it will be interesting to have you here again." The door opened once more, and a small voice shouted excitedly, "Daddy, Daddy, I'm back!" Emma came running in, her blonde hair flying behind her like a little storm of joy. The 4-year-old threw herself into Richard's arms, who caught her with a radiant smile. "So, Princess, how was your outing with Grandma Helen?" Megan felt her world stop. Helen, the matriarch of the Harrison family, Richard's grandmother, the one who had always treated her mother with genuine respect and kindness. The 82-year-old woman who used to read stories to Megan on rainy afternoons. "Grandma Helen is very confused today, Daddy," Emma said with the peculiar seriousness of children. "She called me Sophia several times and asked where Aunt Eleanor was." The silence that followed was deafening. Megan felt all the emotions she had tried to control over the years rush to the surface at once. Richard looked at her with concern, Vivian with something that resembled satisfaction, and little, Emma with childish curiosity. It was then that the sound of slow steps and the characteristic tap of a cane echoed down the hall. Helen Harrison appeared at the entrance to the living room, leaning on her mahogany cane, moving with the dignity of someone who had carried decades of elegance and wisdom. At 82, her white hair was styled in a flawless bun, and her blue eyes, though occasionally clouded, still held the vibrancy Megan remembered from her childhood. "Eleanor." The old woman's voice trembled slightly as her eyes fixed on Megan. "Eleanor, my child, you've come back." Megan's heart clenched violently. The matriarch had mistaken her for her mother, and the physical resemblance between them had always been striking. The same wavy brown hair, the same expressive dark eyes, the same medium height. But the pain of being called by her deceased mother's name was almost unbearable. "Grandma, that's not Aunt Eleanor," Emma said gently, approaching her great-grandmother with the natural patience of children used to dealing with confused elders. "This is a new lady." Helen blinked several times as if trying to adjust the focus of an old camera. Slowly the fog in her eyes cleared and she truly saw Megan for the first time. "Megan?" she whispered, incredulous. "Megan Davis?" "It's me, Mrs. Helen," Megan replied, approaching carefully. The emotion in her voice was palpable. "It's me." The transformation in the matriarch's expression was instantaneous and moving. Her features lit up with a pure, genuine joy that made everyone present feel the intensity of the moment. "My girl, my dear girl." Helen set her cane aside and opened her arms, wrapping Megan in a hug that smelled of talcum powder and lavender, just as she remembered. "You've grown so much. Let me look at you." With trembling but determined hands, Helen held Megan's face between her palms, studying every feature with the attention of someone rediscovering a lost treasure. "You have your mother's eyes, but there's something different in them now. Pain." "I saw that same pain in the mirror when I lost my husband," Helen murmured, displaying a surprising lucidity. "What burden are you carrying, child?" Megan felt the tears stream freely. Helen's ability to see through appearances, even amidst episodes of confusion, had always been extraordinary. I've lost my way, Mrs. Helen. I don't know who I am anymore." "Nonsense," the old woman replied, firmly, picking up her cane and heading for the sofa. "You've always known exactly who you were. The problem is that life sometimes makes us forget. Sit here with me." Richard watched the scene with a nostalgic smile, clearly moved by the reunion. Emma, curious, drew closer as well, fascinated by the special connection that had formed between her great-grandmother and the newcomer. Vivian, however, remained standing near the staircase, her features carefully controlled. But Megan could feel the tension radiating from her like heat waves. "Grandma Helen," Vivian intervened with a forced sweetness, "perhaps you should rest. It's been a long day and you seem tired." "Tired?" Helen turned to her with an expression that mixed confusion and irritation. "Who are you, dear? Do you work here?" The embarrassment was instant and palpable. Vivian paled slightly but maintained her smile, though her eyes betrayed humiliation and anger. "Grandma, this is Vivian, Daddy's fiancée," Emma explained patiently. "She lives here with us." Helen studied Vivian for a long moment, her gaze penetrating and evaluative. "Ah, yes, the fiancée." Her voice carried a neutrality that was more eloquent than any criticism. "You're very different from the others." "Different others?" Vivian asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "The women my grandson truly loved," Helen answered, with a brutal frankness that made Richard cough uncomfortably. Megan sensed the tense moment and tried to intervene. "Mrs. Helen, how about you tell me how the gardens are? Are the rose bushes still blooming like they used to?" The change of subject was gratefully received by everyone except Vivian, who now watched Megan with a poorly disguised hostility. "Ah, the gardens." Helen's eyes sparkled. "You always loved the flowers. Your mother used to say you had a magic touch with plants. Tomorrow you must see the new species we've planted. Richard hired a landscape architect, but I told him no one understands gardens like you and your mother did." Richard smiled. "Actually, Mom, Megan can stay in the guest room for as long as she needs. Consider this your home." "The guest room?" Helen frowned, looking genuinely disturbed. "Nonsense. Megan always had her own room here, the little pink room on the second floor next to the library. Nothing has changed." An uncomfortable silence hung over the group. The little pink room had been converted into Vivian's walk-in closet 2 years ago, a fact Helen had evidently forgotten or refused to accept. "Grandma," Richard began gently, "that room is now—" "It's Vivian's closet," Emma completed innocently, making the situation even more awkward. Helen's expression changed dramatically. The confusion gave way to a crystal clear and completely lucid indignation. "You turned Megan's room into a closet?" Her voice rose a few tones, laden with disapproval. "The room where she grew up, where her mother put her to bed when she worked late. You turned it into a wardrobe." Vivian finally lost her composure. With all due respect, Mrs. Helen, Megan hasn't lived here for almost 20 years. It was a waste to leave a room empty when I needed space for your things, Helen interrupted with a cutting coldness. Of course. How could I forget that everything in this house now revolves around your needs? The tension in the room became almost suffocating. Emma, sensing the hostility, moved closer to Richard, who automatically scooped her into his arms. Perhaps we should have dinner, Richard suggested, desperately trying to defuse the situation. Megan, you must be starving after your trip. She will dine with us in the main dining room, Helen declared, as if laying down the law. As it always was, as it always should have been. Vivian opened her mouth to protest, but the look Richard gave her made her reconsider. However, Megan could see the fury building in the woman's eyes. During dinner, the atmosphere remained tense. Helen monopolized the conversation, asking Megan about her life, genuinely interested in her experiences as a paramedic, expressing pride in the young woman's studies and achievements. "Saving lives," Helen murmured, holding Megan's hand. "Just like your mother. She saved this family every day in ways you couldn't even imagine." "What do you mean, Grandma?" Emma asked. Curious, Helen smiled mysteriously. Eleanor knew things. She saw things. She protected this house in ways no one noticed until she was gone. Vivian let out a forced laugh. What an imagination, Mrs. Helen. Eleanor was a wonderful cook, but to say she protected the house. "You didn't know her," Helen replied dryly. "You don't know what you're talking about." Later that night, after Emma had been put to bed and Richard had retired to his study for some business calls, Megan found herself alone in the library with Helen. "You didn't come back just because you were lost," the old woman observed, flipping through an old photo album. "There's something more." Megan hesitated, but the need to confide in someone who truly knew her was stronger. "I lost a patient 3 weeks ago, a child Emma's age. I couldn't save her." The words came out like a painful confession. Helen nodded understandingly. "And now you question everything. If it's worth it, if you're strong enough, if you should continue." "How do you know?" "Because I went through it when my husband passed. I questioned my strength, my ability to keep caring for this family. Your mother was the one who helped me find my way back." Helen turned a page in the album, revealing a photo of Eleanor in the kitchen, smiling as she prepared Megan's birthday cake. "She told me something I never forgot. Mrs. Helen, sometimes life puts us at rock bottom, not to punish us, but to show us we have the strength to climb back up." Her words. Megan felt a shiver run down her spine. The words sounded exactly like something her mother would say. "She talked about you constantly," Helen continued. "Worried that you were drifting away from who you really were. She said that one day you would come home, but not as the girl who left. You would return as the strong woman she had raised." At that moment, soft footsteps echoed in the hall. Vivian appeared at the library entrance, wearing a silk robe and carrying a cup of tea. "Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't sleep." Her smile was too sweet to be genuine. "What an interesting conversation you two are having." Helen closed the album abruptly, as if protecting something precious. "We were just reminiscing about old times," Megan answered diplomatically. "How nostalgic," Vivian commented, approaching. "But sometimes it's best to leave the past where it belongs, don't you think? Especially when creating unrealistic expectations about the present can be dangerous." The subtle threat in Vivian's words did not go unnoticed by either of them. Helen sat up straighter in her armchair, her eyes glinting with a sharp lucidity. "Unrealistic expectations," she repeated slowly. "Or are you afraid that some people might see the difference between what is real and what is artificial?" The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meanings. Vivian gripped her cup so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Well," she said finally, forcing a smile, "I think we all need some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Richard wants to take Emma to see the family's new property, a charming farm we recently bought." Megan noticed how Vivian emphasized the word "we," marking her territory. "A farm?" Helen seemed surprised. Richard didn't tell me about any farm. It's a surprise for you, Mrs. Helen. He wanted to wait until everything was ready. It's a perfect place for you to rest, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Something in Vivian's tone made Megan shiver. There was a calculated coldness in her words that didn't match the sweet smile she maintained. Away from the hustle and bustle, Helen repeated thoughtfully. How interesting. After Vivian left, Helen turned to Megan with a worried expression. That woman, she began, but stopped, shaking her head. What's wrong with her? Megan asked, though she already suspected the answer. I don't trust her. There's something predatory in the way she looks at things, at people, as if she's always calculating their value. Helen gripped Megan's hand with surprising strength. Promise me something, child. If anything happens to me, if I lose my way for good, you won't let her take over everything. This family, this house, there are secrets here that she must not discover. What secrets, Mrs. Helen? But the old woman was already getting up, leaning heavily on her cane, the momentary lucidity seeming to fade like morning mist. Secrets, she murmured, heading for the door. Your mother knew. Now you need to know too. And with those enigmatic words, Helen left Megan alone in the library, surrounded by shadows and the growing feeling that her return to this house had unleashed forces she didn't fully understand. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the wind continued to sway the trees in the garden, creating dancing shadows on the windows. Megan went to the window and looked out at the yard where she used to play as a child. It was then that she saw a figure moving furtively near the back garden. Someone with a flashlight, examining something in the ground near the rose bushes her mother had loved so much. When the figure turned, Megan recognized the unmistakable profile of Vivian, crouched beside what looked like a freshly dug patch of earth. Megan's heart raced. What was Vivian doing in the garden in the middle of the night? And why had she chosen the very spot where her mother used to spend hours tending to her plants? A sense of imminent danger washed over her, the same intuition that alerted her during medical emergencies when a situation was about to deteriorate rapidly. Something was very wrong in this house, and Megan had the terrible feeling that her arrival had accelerated events that had been carefully planned for a very long time. Megan woke before dawn to the soft sound of footsteps in the hallway. During her years as a paramedic, she had developed a light sleep, always alert for emergencies. She glanced at the clock on the nightstand. 5:15 a.m. Who would be moving about the house at this hour? Silently, she crept to the guest room door and opened it a crack. Vivian's figure was passing down the hall toward the stairs, carrying a small briefcase and wearing athletic clothes completely out of character for a woman who lived in high heels and designer dresses. Megan waited a few minutes before discreetly moving toward the hallway window that overlooked the gardens. Vivian was near the rose bushes again, but this time she was with a man Megan didn't recognize. Tall, dark-haired, and dressed in gardener's clothes, he seemed to be receiving precise instructions about something. When the man knelt to examine the soil, Megan realized he was measuring distances with a tape measure. Vivian pointed to different spots in the garden, as if planning some kind of renovation or construction. But why do it in secret, before sunrise? You can't sleep either? Megan jumped at the soft voice behind her. It was Emma, still in her pajamas, clutching a teddy bear, her blonde hair tousled from sleep. Emma, you scared me, sweetie, Megan whispered, crouching down to the girl's level. Why are you up so early? I always wake up when Vivian goes to her secret meetings, Emma replied, with the unsettling matter-of-factness of children. She thinks nobody notices, but I see her from my window. Secret meetings? Megan tried to keep her voice casual, but her heart sped up. Emma nodded gravely. With different men. Sometimes they're gardeners, sometimes they're men in suits who drive black cars. They always look at the house like they're studying something. Megan's sense of alarm intensified. As a paramedic, she had learned to recognize the signs of dangerous situations, and the behavior Emma described triggered all her protective instincts. Have you ever told your dad about this? She asked gently. Emma shook her head. Vivian said they're surprises for Daddy, and that I shouldn't tell. But I don't like secrets. They make me feel scared. Megan felt a wave of tenderness for the little girl, mixed with growing concern. She took Emma's small hand and led her away from the window. "How about we have some hot chocolate in the kitchen? Just the two of us." Emma's eyes lit up with joy. "Can we make it like Aunt Eleanor used to, with marshmallows and cinnamon?" The mention of her mother's name hit Megan like a punch, but she smiled through the pain. "Of course, sweetie, just like she used to." In the kitchen, as they prepared the hot chocolate, Emma chatted about her memories with Mrs. Helen and how she liked it when her great-grandmother was clear-headed, as she called the old woman's moments of lucidity. "Grandma Helen sometimes tells me stories about when my daddy was little," Emma shared, smudging her nose with chocolate. "She says he was very sad when Aunt Eleanor went away, and that he was never the same after that." "Sad how?" "She says he became empty, like a house with no people inside." Emma paused thoughtfully. "But when you came yesterday, I saw him smile in a different way, like someone had turned on the lights in the house." Before Megan could respond, Vivian's voice echoed through the kitchen. "Emma, what are you doing down here?" Vivian entered, still in her athletic clothes, but now with a controlled, worried expression. "You should be sleeping, young lady." "Megan was making me hot chocolate," Emma answered innocently. "Like Aunt Eleanor used to?" Megan noticed how Vivian's expression hardened for a moment at the mention of her mother's name. "How kind of Megan," Vivian said, forcing a smile. "But Emma needs to go back to bed. Today is going to be a very special day." "Why?" Emma asked, curious. "Because we're going to visit our new farm. Remember I mentioned it yesterday. It's going to be a wonderful adventure for the whole family." Megan sensed something strange in Vivian's exaggerated enthusiasm. There was an underlying urgency in her voice that didn't match the casualness she was trying to project. "The whole family?" Megan asked casually. "Well, the four of us, of course, Richard, me, Emma, and—" Vivian paused deliberately. "Mrs. Helen. The country air will be very good for her." "And me?" Megan asked, though she already suspected the answer. Vivian smiled with a venomous sweetness. "Oh dear, I'm sure you'd rather stay here and rest. Trips can be so tiring, especially for someone who's just come from such an intense emotional journey." Before Megan could reply, Helen's voice echoed from the main hall. "Emma, where's my little granddaughter?" Emma ran toward her great-grandmother's voice, leaving Megan and Vivian alone. In the kitchen, the silence that followed was thick with poorly disguised hostility. "You're smarter than I thought," Vivian said, dropping any pretense of friendliness. Her voice became low and threatening. "But you're also more naive." "What do you mean? Do you think you can just waltz back in here and reclaim your special little place in this family?" Vivian moved closer, her blue eyes glinting with a calculating coldness. "This isn't your home anymore, Megan. You're just a guest who has overstayed her welcome." Megan stood her ground, using the same calm she applied in emergency situations. "I didn't come here to reclaim anything. I came to find peace." "Peace?" Vivian laughed, but the sound was humorless. "Peace is what you'll have when you understand that you don't belong here anymore. Helen is getting more confused by the day. Richard has a new life with me and Emma, and frankly, no one here needs painful reminders of the past. Reminders like my mother. Your mother served this family well, but that was a long time ago. Now it's my turn to take care of them, and I won't let outsiders get in the way of my plans." The word outsiders was spoken with such venom that Megan felt a chill run down her spine. There was something deeply disturbing in the way Vivian talked about the family, as if they were possessions to be controlled. "Megan! Vivian!" Richard's voice cut through the tension. He entered the kitchen wearing a robe, a worried look on his face. "Are you two okay? I heard voices." "Of course we're fine, darling." Vivian's expression transformed instantly, her smile warm and fake. "Just planning our day at the farm." Richard looked from one to the other, clearly sensing some tension but not knowing what. "It was about that," he said hesitantly. "My mother insists that Megan come with us. She got very agitated when she heard we were planning to leave her here." Megan saw Vivian's fists clench imperceptibly, but the woman maintained her smile. "Of course. How silly of me to suggest Megan stay. Of course she should come. The more, the merrier. But her eyes said the exact opposite. Later that morning, as everyone prepared for the trip, Megan found herself with Helen in the library again. The old woman was flipping through the same photo album from the night before, but this time she seemed more agitated. "I don't like this farm idea," Helen muttered, turning the pages nervously. "Something isn't right." "Why do you say that?" "Vivian." Helen said the name with contempt. "She's too eager to get me away from here, too insistent. And when someone is too insistent about something that should be a pleasure, what do you think she's planning?" Helen closed the album and looked directly into Megan's eyes. "I don't know. But your mother taught me to trust my instincts, and my instincts tell me this trip isn't about a relaxing day in the country." The old woman stood and walked to a specific bookshelf, pulling out a seemingly ordinary book on gardening. But when she opened it, Megan saw that the pages had been cut out, creating a secret compartment. "Your mother left this for you," Helen said, taking out a sealed envelope, "with instructions for me to give it to you only if something happened to me or if you needed the truth." Megan took the envelope with trembling hands. On the paper, yellowed with age, was written in neat script, "For Megan when the storm comes by Mum." "What's inside?" "I don't know. Eleanor made me promise not to open it, but she said it contains information about this family that could protect you if necessary." Before Megan could open the envelope, Vivian's voice echoed down the hall. "Everyone, the car is ready. Time to leave for our country adventure." Helen gripped Megan's wrist with surprising strength. "Hide this. Read it only when you're alone and safe. And Megan," her voice became urgent, "if something happens to me on this trip, if I get lost or get hurt, promise me you'll investigate. Promise me you won't let her win." "Win what?" "Mrs. Helen." But the old woman was already walking toward the door, leaning on her cane, muttering something Megan couldn't quite understand. An hour later, they were all settled in Richard's luxury SUV. Emma was in the back seat next to Megan, Helen next to Vivian in the middle row, and Richard was driving. During the 2-hour drive to the farm, Megan discreetly observed Vivian's behavior. The woman seemed to know the route far too well for someone who was supposedly visiting the property for the first time. When Richard made a wrong turn, she corrected him before he even realized his mistake. When he commented that he wasn't sure of the correct entrance, she pointed out the exact gate without hesitation. "You've been here before," Megan observed casually. "Just to check the condition of the property before we finalized the purchase," Vivian answered quickly. "You don't buy a farm without a proper inspection." But Richard looked confused. "Vivian, didn't you say you hired that realtor to do the inspection? I thought none of us had visited before." A flash of irritation crossed Vivian's eyes before she replied with a forced laugh. "Oh, darling, you know how I'm a perfectionist. I just went for a quick look to make sure it would be perfect for our family." Megan noticed how she emphasized "our family," subtly excluding Megan from the equation. When they arrived at the farm, Megan immediately understood why Vivian had chosen this location. The property was isolated, surrounded by miles of empty fields, with the nearest house at least 5 miles away. The main building was old but solid, surrounded by barns and outbuildings in various states of disrepair. "It's a bit remote," Richard commented, sounding less enthusiastic than expected. "Exactly what we need," Vivian replied, getting out of the car with suspicious energy. Total peace, no distractions, no nosy neighbors. As they explored the property, Megan stayed close to Helen, who seemed increasingly agitated. Emma ran around the yard, delighted by the freedom of the open space, but Megan noticed that Vivian watched her with an attention that seemed more vigilant than maternal. It was when they reached the back of the property that Megan saw something that made her blood run cold. Near a grove of trees, there was a wooden structure covering what was clearly an old well. The wooden cover was partially rotted, and some of the planks looked as if they had been deliberately loosened. Vivian followed Megan's gaze and smiled. "Ah, yes, the well. It's a relic from the previous owners. We'll have to fence it off properly for safety, especially with Emma around." But instead of sounding like a genuine concern, her words seemed to carry a subtle threat. And when she looked at Helen, who was slowly approaching with her cane, leaning on Richard's arm, Megan saw something in her eyes that made her understand with absolute clarity this trip wasn't about a relaxing day in the country. It was a carefully planned trap, and they had just walked right into it. The first night at the farm was unsettling. Megan had managed a moment of privacy in the room she'd been assigned, an outbuilding separate from the main house that Vivian had insisted was more suitable for guests, and finally opened her mother's letter. The words written in the familiar script hit her like successive waves of revelation and horror. My dearest Megan, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me and you have returned home seeking answers. I need to tell you truths I kept to protect you, but which may now be your only salvation. The Harrison family was always good to me, but in the last months of my life I discovered disturbing things. Richard was being manipulated by someone close to him who planned to take over the family fortune. I couldn't prove it at the time, but I documented everything I saw and heard. In the garden, I buried a box near the third rose bush from the left. Inside is evidence of recorded phone calls and documents showing suspicious money transfers. If anything happens to Mrs. Helen, if she is put in danger or isolated from the family, you will know my fears have come true. Megan, you have a strength I never imagined I had. Use your experience as a paramedic. You know how to recognize dangerous situations before it's too late. Trust your instincts. Protect Helen. And remember, sometimes you have to go to the bottom of the well to save a life. With all my love and hope in your courage, Mom. Megan reread the letter 3 times, her hands shaking. Her mother had died knowing some terrible truth, and now Megan understood why Helen had always seemed apprehensive about Vivian. A noise outside made her quickly put the letter away. Peeking through the window, she saw Vivian walking around the back of the property with a flashlight, speaking softly on the phone. From her position, Megan managed to catch a few words. Tomorrow, isolated, no witnesses? Megan's heart pounded. No witnesses for what? The next morning, Vivian announced at breakfast that she had planned special activities for everyone. How about we explore the trails on the property? There's one in particular that leads to a magnificent view of the area, she suggested, with exaggerated enthusiasm. Richard, you should bring your camera to photograph your mother enjoying the fresh air. Helen, who had spent a restless night and seemed more confused than usual, waved a vague hand. Trails? I'm too old for hiking, dear. That's why I've prepared a solution. Vivian smiled triumphantly. I found an old wheelchair in the barn. You can ride comfortably while we walk alongside. Megan felt all her internal alarms go off at once. A wheelchair on uneven terrain, a confused elderly woman, a trail in an isolated location. The combination reminded her of all the accidents she had responded to over the years. Maybe we should stay close to the house, Megan suggested cautiously. Mrs. Helen seems a bit tired today. Nonsense, Vivian replied, with a firmness that sounded almost aggressive. The fresh air will do wonders for her. Besides, I've already arranged everything. It would be a shame to waste such a beautiful day. Richard, who had been distracted checking emails on his phone, looked up. Vivian's right. Mom used to love hiking when she was younger. It might be good for her. Emma, sitting next to Megan, whispered softly, I don't want to go on the trail. There's a haunted place there. Haunted? Megan asked, intrigued. I saw it yesterday when I was playing. There's a big deep hole covered with old wood. And Vivian told me not to tell anyone because it's dangerous. Megan felt the blood freeze in her veins. The well. Vivian had taken Emma near the well and told her not to tell anyone. Emma, Megan said gently, how about you and I stay here and play while the grown-ups go for a walk? Absolutely not, Vivian intervened sharply. Emma needs exercise and fresh air too. Families do activities together. The way she emphasized families, while looking directly at Megan, was unmistakable. Megan was being excluded, but Emma was being forced to participate. Why? An hour later, they were all gathered in the backyard. Helen sat in the old wheelchair, which creaked ominously when Richard tested it. This chair looks unstable, Megan observed, examining the wheels and brakes. Maybe we should... It's just for show, Vivian interrupted quickly. These old chairs are sturdier than the modern ones. My grandfather used one just like it. Megan noticed that Vivian had strategically positioned herself behind Helen's chair, taking control of its direction. Richard walked ahead, exploring the terrain, with Emma, while Megan was relegated to the position of companion. The trail started smoothly, but Megan soon realized they were being led in a specific direction. Vivian knew the path perfectly, navigating turns and forks with the precision of someone who had walked this route many times. "You've really never been here before?" Megan asked, trying to sound casual. "Just a quick inspection, like I said yesterday," Vivian replied, but there was tension in her voice. When they reached a fork in the trail, Richard stopped, confused. "Which way do we go? There's no sign." "To the left," Vivian answered immediately, then quickly corrected herself. I think to the left, it looks more promising." But Megan had noticed the initial certainty in her voice. Vivian knew exactly where they were going. As they moved forward, the terrain became more uneven. The wheels of Helen's chair began to get stuck frequently on roots and rocks. The old woman, who had started the trip in one of her more confused states, now seemed agitated and disoriented. "Where are we going?" she asked repeatedly. "I don't recognize this place." "It's an adventure, Grandma," Emma said gently, holding her great-grandmother's wrinkled hand. "We're going to see beautiful things." Megan carefully observed the terrain ahead and noticed something disturbing. There were marks on the ground, tire tracks and footprints that suggested vehicles and people had been there recently. More disturbingly, some of these tracks seemed to match the size of the wheels on Helen's chair exactly. "Vivian," Megan said cautiously, "are you sure this is the way to the scenic view?" "Of course I am," Vivian replied, but there was a defensive note in her voice. "Just a little further." When they finally reached a clearing, Megan immediately saw what Vivian had planned for them to find. The old well was there, partially hidden by vegetation, its rotted wooden cover clearly unstable. But what alarmed her most was how the surrounding terrain had been subtly altered. Some rocks had been removed, creating an almost imperceptible slope toward the well. Branches had been strategically broken, creating a path that would naturally lead someone directly into the trap. To anyone who didn't know what to look for, it would seem completely natural. To Megan, who had investigated accident scenes for years, it was obviously manipulated. "What an interesting place," Richard commented, approaching the edge of the clearing with Emma. "It's very isolated here." "Too isolated," Megan muttered, instinctively positioning herself between the well and Helen. Vivian had stopped the wheelchair just a few feet from the well, in a position Megan immediately recognized as dangerous. Any sudden movement, any loss of control of the chair, and Helen would roll directly into the trap. "The view must be beautiful from up there," Vivian said, pointing to a nearby rise. "Richard, why don't you and Emma go up and take some pictures? Megan and I will stay here and look after Mrs. Helen." Megan felt every muscle in her body tense. Vivian wanted to separate the witnesses. She wanted to be alone with Helen and Megan in an isolated spot next to a deadly trap. "Actually," Megan said firmly, "I think we should head back. Mrs. Helen looks tired, and this terrain is too rough for the wheelchair." "Nonsense," Vivian retorted with a vehemence that made Richard look at her in surprise. "We just got here. Mrs. Helen is having fun, aren't you, dear?" Helen, lost in her confusion, just mumbled something inaudible. It was then that Megan saw something that made her heart stop. When Vivian had bent down to adjust something on Helen's chair, she had discreetly released the brake. The chair was now on a slight incline, completely unsecured, just feet from a deadly well. And Vivian was positioning herself behind the chair, her hands on the grips as if preparing to push. "Vivian," Megan said, her voice carrying all the authority she had developed in emergency situations, "step away from the chair, now." "Excuse me." Vivian blinked with false innocence. "I'm just helping." "You released the brake." Megan moved quickly, placing herself between Vivian and Helen's chair. "And this ground is deliberately sloped toward the well." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard, who was a few yards away with Emma, turned with a look of complete confusion. "Megan, what are you talking about?" But when he saw everyone's positioning, Vivian behind the unlocked chair, Helen vulnerable just feet from a deadly well, Megan blocking the path with a defensive stance. Something in his expression changed. "Vivian," he said slowly, "why did you release the brake on the wheelchair?" Vivian laughed, but the sound was forced and hysterical. "I didn't release anything. This woman is paranoid. She's seeing dangers where there are none." "Then why?" Megan said, pointing to the marks on the ground. "Is there evidence that someone was here before, planning this exact scenario? Why do you know this trail so well? And why did you make a point of bringing Helen to this specific spot?" Richard followed Megan's gaze and saw the same evidence she had noticed: the tire tracks, the strategically broken branches, the subtly altered terrain. "My God," he whispered, the realization hitting him like a wave. "Vivian, what were you planning?" For a moment no one moved. Then, with the speed of a striking snake, Vivian shoved Helen's chair with all her might. Megan had no time to think. She just reacted, throwing herself in front of the moving chair, absorbing the impact with her own body as she desperately tried to redirect its trajectory. What happened next was a chaos of screams, splintering wood, and the horrifying sound of something heavy falling into the darkness of the well. Megan managed to partially divert the chair's path, but it wasn't enough. The impact threw her to the ground with brutal force, while Helen, still in the out-of-control chair, plummeted through the rotten cover of the well. The sound of shattering wood was followed by a scream of terror that echoed from the dark depths. "Helen!" Richard's cry cut through the air like a blade as he sprinted toward the well. Emma, paralyzed by shock, began to cry inconsolably. Megan staggered to her feet, ignoring the sharp pain in her shoulder where she had hit a rock. Her medical training took over automatically, suppressing the panic and activating emergency protocols she had memorized years ago. "Richard!" she yelled, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding in a crisis. "Get Emma away from the well, now!" Vivian stood near. The trees, her clothes dirty and her face twisted in an expression of fury and frustration. The masks were off, the pretenses gone. The plan had failed, and she knew it. Megan cautiously approached the edge of the well and shouted down, "Mrs. Helen, can you hear me?" A faint, frightened voice echoed from the depths. "Megan? Megan, I'm down here, I can't move and the water is freezing." Megan's heart clenched. Helen was alive, but likely injured and hypothermic. Every second counted. She began to assess the situation with the cold precision of an experienced paramedic. The well was about 15 feet deep, its stone walls covered in moss and decay. There was no ladder or rope available. She would have to improvise a rescue system with the resources at hand. "Richard," she called, "your clothes. Take off your shirt, your pants. We're going to make a rope." "A rope?" Richard obeyed without question, quickly stripping. "You're going down?" "It's the only way. Helen is injured and in cold water. If we wait for help—" Megan didn't finish the sentence. They both knew the farm was too isolated to wait for outside assistance. As she tied the clothes into an improvised rope, Megan felt the memories of the accident that had ruined her career come flooding back. The 5-year-old boy, the blood, the feeling of helplessness when she realized she had arrived too late. "I'll go down," Richard said suddenly. "It's my mother, I should—" "No." Megan cut him off firmly. "You're not trained. If something goes wrong, I'll have 2 patients to rescue instead of 1. Vivian, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Maybe we should call for professional rescue. It's not wise to risk more lives." Megan spun to face her, her eyes blazing with a controlled fury. "Now you're worried about lives? After you pushed a helpless old woman into a well?" "I didn't push anyone," Vivian shrieked, but her voice trembled. "The chair slipped. It was an accident." "An accident you meticulously planned," Megan retorted, testing the strength of the makeshift rope. "The marks on the ground, the altered terrain, the released brake. You scouted this place. You set it all up." Richard looked from one to the other in growing horror, the truth finally sinking in completely. "Why?" he whispered to Vivian. "Why would you do this to my mother?" Vivian laughed, a hysterical, desperate sound. "Your mother, your dear mother who controls every aspect of your life, who never accepted me, who always looked at me like I was an intruder. She's a confused, harmless old woman." "Harmless?" Vivian spat the words. "She changed the will, Richard. Last week, when you weren't home, she called the lawyer. She left everything to charities and to—" She pointed at Megan with hatred. "The cook's daughter." The silence that followed was broken only by Emma's sobs and Helen's faint moans from the well. Megan felt the world spin. Helen had changed the will and included her name? "That's a lie," Richard murmured, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "Ask Dr. Miller, the family lawyer. Or better yet, ask your precious mother, if she survives." Megan couldn't waste any more time on revelations. Helen was in imminent danger, and every second of exposure to the cold increased the risk of hypothermic shock. "Richard, hold the rope. Don't let go, no matter what happens." She positioned herself at the edge of the well, the rope tied around her waist. The memories of the accident continued to haunt her, but now there was something stronger than the trauma, the determination not to fail again. The descent was treacherous, the well walls were slippery, and more than once Megan nearly lost her footing. When she finally reached the bottom, she found Helen semi-conscious, huddled in a corner where there was less icy water. "Mrs. Helen," Megan whispered, kneeling beside the old woman. "It's me. I'm here to get you." Helen's eyes fluttered open, cloudy but focusing on Megan. "My girl, I knew you'd come, just like your mother. Always saving this family." Megan quickly assessed her injuries. Multiple bruises, a possible concussion, but apparently no broken bones. The greatest danger was hypothermia. "I need to get you up. It's going to hurt, but I'll be as gentle as I can." Securing Helen for the lift was a technical challenge that required all of Megan's experience in emergency rescues. She improvised a harness with parts of her own clothing, ensuring it distributed the weight in a way that wouldn't aggravate potential internal injuries. "Richard!" she yelled up. "I'm coming up with her. I need you to pull slowly and steadily when I give the word." The ascent was the most terrifying experience of Megan's life, carrying Helen's weight, scrambling up the unstable well walls, fighting her own traumatic memories. At one point, one of the wall stones gave way under her hand, nearly sending them both plummeting back to the bottom. It was in that moment of total panic that Megan heard Helen's voice, weak but clear. "Your mother would be so proud. You have the strength she always knew you had." Those words gave Megan the final burst of energy she needed. With a superhuman effort, she managed to hoist Helen to the edge of the well, where Richard received her with tears in his eyes. Megan emerged moments later, exhausted and injured, but triumphant. She immediately began checking Helen's vital signs, administering first aid with the efficiency of someone who had found her calling once again. "She needs to be warmed up immediately," Megan instructed Richard. "We have to get her back to the house." It was then that she realized Vivian was gone. "Where is she?" Megan asked, looking around. Richard, who was holding Emma in his arms to comfort her, pointed toward the trail. "She ran. As soon as you came up with my mother, she just ran." Megan felt a mix of relief and concern. Relief, because Vivian was no longer an immediate threat, but concern because a desperate, cornered person could be even more dangerous. As they improvised a stretcher to carry Helen back to the house, the old woman squeezed Megan's hand with surprising strength. "The papers," she whispered, for Megan's ears only. "In the safe, behind Eleanor's portrait. The combination is... It's both of your birthdays." Megan nodded, understanding. Helen was referring to the will documents, but also, possibly, the evidence her mother had mentioned in the letter. The journey back was slow and careful. Helen drifted between consciousness and delirium, occasionally murmuring the names of people dead for decades, other times speaking with perfect clarity about recent events. When they finally reached the farmhouse, Megan set up a makeshift care area in the main room. Helen was stable, but she needed professional medical attention. "We're going to have to get her to a hospital," Megan told Richard. "She needs scans to rule out internal injuries." But when Richard tried to start the car, they discovered Vivian's final act of sabotage. The tires had been slashed and the engine wires cut, They were stranded at the farm with an injured old woman, no, transportation, and a desperate woman on the run who knew the area much better than they did. And night was beginning to fall. "Megan," Richard said, his voice thick with fear. "What do we do now?" Megan looked out the window at the approaching darkness, then at Helen sleeping restlessly on the sofa-turned bed, and finally at Emma, who clung to her father with wide, terrified eyes. "Now," she said, feeling the strength her mother and Helen always knew she possessed, "we protect our family, and we wait for Vivian to make the mistake that will let us end this once, and for all." But deep down, Megan knew Vivian wasn't finished. Women like her didn't run to hide, they ran to regroup, and when they returned, it would be with one last desperate play. The storm was just beginning. The night at the farm passed like a terrifying vigil. Megan stayed by Helen's side, monitoring her breathing and temperature, while Richard desperately tried to find a way to communicate with the outside world. The farm's landline had been cut, another act of sabotage by Vivian, and there was no cell service in the isolated region. Emma, traumatized by the day's events, refused to leave her father's or Megan's side. The child had witnessed things no 4-year-old should ever see, and her eyes held a heart-wrenching fear. "Megan," Helen murmured during one of her lucid moments around 3 in the morning. "The papers. You have to get the papers, and before she comes back." "She's not coming back," Richard said, trying to convince himself. "Why would she? Her plan failed. She must be long gone." Megan didn't share Richard's optimism. She knew enough about human nature from her years as a paramedic to know that desperate people made irrational decisions, and Vivian Monroe was a woman who had meticulously planned the elimination of an elderly woman for money. She wasn't the type to simply disappear at the first sign of trouble. "She'll be back," Megan said quietly, so as not to alarm Emma. "People like her don't give up. They escalate." As the first ray of sunlight appeared on the horizon, Megan made a decision. "Richard, you stay here and take care of your mother and Emma. I'm going to walk to the main road and try to find help." "Absolutely not," Richard protested. "It's too dangerous. Vivian could be hiding anywhere." "That's exactly why I have to go. Helen needs medical care I can't provide here, and we need to report what happened to the authorities." Megan was preparing to leave when she heard the sound of an approaching engine. They all froze. From the sound, it was a large vehicle, possibly a truck or a van. "Do you think it's help?" Richard whispered hopefully. Megan peeked through the window and felt her blood run cold. It wasn't help. It was Vivian, behind the wheel of a dark van, accompanied by 2 men she didn't recognize. And they were armed with what looked like construction tools: shovels, hammers, rope. "She's back," Megan announced, trying to keep her voice calm. "And she's not alone." Richard ran to the window and paled when he saw the van parking in front of the house. Who are those men? Megan thought quickly. The van, the tools, the choice of an isolated property. Vivian hadn't just come back to confront them. She had come back to finish the job. "Richard, take Emma and Helen and go to the back barn. Is there a rear exit?" "Yes, but my mother can't be moved." "She'll have to be. These men didn't come here to talk." Vivian got out of the van and walked toward the front door with the confidence of someone who had regained control of the situation. The 2 men followed her, burly types who were clearly no strangers to dirty work. Megan recognized one of them. It was the same man she had seen in the estate garden that morning that felt like years ago. Vivian had been planning this for much longer than any of them had imagined. "Megan Davis!" Vivian shouted from outside. "I know you're in there. Let's talk like civilized people." "Civilized?" Megan muttered to herself, watching the men position themselves strategically around the house. Civilized people don't try to murder old women. While Richard struggled to move Helen carefully toward the back of the house, Megan assessed her options. The farm was isolated, with no nearby neighbors, no communication. Vivian had chosen the perfect location for a final showdown. "Megan!" Vivian yelled again. "You have 5 minutes to come out here, alone, or my friends are coming in and you won't like their methods." Megan looked at Richard, who was carrying Emma, while trying to help Helen move. The old woman was conscious, but clearly in pain and weak. "Go," Megan whispered. "I'll distract her." "No," Richard protested. "I'm not leaving you alone with that psycho." You have to take care of your family. Your mother needs you. Emma needs you. Helen, leaning on Richard, gripped Megan's arm with surprising strength. Don't sacrifice yourself for us, child. Your mother wouldn't want... My mother taught me that family protects family, Megan replied, kissing the old woman's forehead. And you are my family. With a heavy heart, Megan watched Richard lead Helen and Emma toward the back of the house. Once she was sure they were safe, she opened the front door. Vivian stood in the yard, transformed. Her blonde hair was disheveled, her clothes dirty and torn, and there was a dangerous madness in her eyes. The two men flanked her, one holding a shovel, the other a hammer. Ah, Megan, finally, I'm so glad you decided to be reasonable. What do you want, Vivian? What do I want? Vivian laughed, a hysterical, terrifying sound. I want my life back. I want what's rightfully mine, and I want you to stop ruining everything. Helen is hurt. She needs medical attention. Let us take her to the hospital, and then we can talk about... Hospital? Vivian interrupted. Darling, after what she saw yesterday, there's no hospital for Helen, not for any of you. The coldness in those words hit Megan like a bucket of ice water. Vivian was no longer trying to hide her intentions. She was no longer pretending it had been an accident. You're talking about murder, Megan said, keeping her voice steady despite her growing terror. I'm talking about survival, Vivian retorted. Do you think I'm going to let you destroy my life, let you tell everyone what happened yesterday, let you turn me into a criminal? You already are a criminal. Not yet, Vivian screamed, completely losing her composure. Not yet, because I haven't finished the job. One of the men stepped forward. It was the one Megan had seen in the garden, and up close she could see he was even more intimidating than he had seemed from a distance. Scars on his face, cold eyes, movements that suggested a familiarity with violence. Enough talk, Vivian, he said in a rough voice. Let's get this over with. The longer we waste here, the bigger the risk. Where are the others? Vivian asked Megan. Richard, the old woman, the girl? Megan remained silent, but her gaze involuntarily flickered toward the back of the house. It was a fatal mistake. Check out back, Vivian ordered the men, and remember, no witnesses. Megan felt panic take over. Richard and Emma were innocent in all of this. Helen was a frail old woman. She couldn't let anything happen to them. Wait, she yelled as the men started to move. I have information you want, about the documents Helen hid, about the will. Vivian paused, curiosity and greed glinting in her eyes. What documents? My mother left evidence, recordings of your conversations, proof that you've been planning this for years. It was a partial lie, but Megan hoped it was convincing enough to buy time. Where is this so-called evidence? At the estate, hidden where only I can find it. Vivian studied Megan for a long moment, clearly trying to decide whether to believe her. You're lying. I'm talking about recordings where you discuss how to get rid of Helen to inherit the family fortune. I'm talking about documents that show your suspicious financial transfers. Do you really want to risk that evidence being found? Vivian's expression changed. There was something in those specific accusations that had hit a nerve. That's impossible, she muttered, more to herself than to Megan. Eleanor died before she couldn't have known. Known what, Vivian? The woman realized she had said too much. Her expression hardened again. It doesn't matter. You're making up stories to buy time. Then why do you look so worried? Just then, one of the men came running back from the rear of the house. They're gone, he announced. Found an open door in the barn and tracks leading into the woods. Vivian spun on, Megan with renewed fury. You helped them escape. And I'd do it again, Megan answered defiantly. Vivian's slap was so hard Megan saw stars. When her vision cleared, the woman was right in her face, her eyes blazing with homicidal rage. You know what your problem is, Megan. You think you're a hero. You think you can save everyone, just like your mother thought she could. My mother saved people. It was her job. It was who she was. Your mother, Vivian spat, was where she shouldn't have been, saw what she shouldn't have seen and paid the price. Megan felt the world stop. The implication of those words hit her like a lightning bolt. What are you saying? Vivian laughed, realizing she had finally found a way to cause Megan the maximum possible pain. Your dear mother, did you really think she died of natural causes? At 42, perfectly healthy. You're lying, Megan whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She figured out my plans too early, almost ruined everything, so I adjusted the situation. The confession hit Megan with the force of an explosion. Her mother hadn't died naturally, she had been murdered by Vivian. The pain, the anger, and the despair mingled in an emotional torrent that threatened to shatter Megan's control. But instead of collapsing, she felt something different rise within her, a cold, determined fury, the kind her mother would have felt defending her family. "You killed my mother," Megan said, her voice taking on a dangerous quality. "And now I'm going to kill you. The difference is, this time, no one will be left wondering what happened. Accidents happen on isolated farms, especially when people are careless around old wells." Vivian signaled to her men who closed in on Megan, their tools held like makeshift weapons. But Megan was no longer thinking like a victim. She was thinking like a paramedic who had spent years dealing with life-or-death situations, and for the first time since the accident that had ruined her career, she felt completely in control. "There's just one problem with your plan, Vivian," Megan said, backing slowly toward the house. "What's that?" "You underestimated who you're dealing with." And with those words, Megan sprinted into the house, bolting the door behind her, and beginning what she knew would be the fight for her life, and for the lives of everyone she loved. Megan bolted the door and immediately began assessing the situation with the same systematic methodology she used in medical emergencies. The house had 3 main entrances, several windows, and an attic with roof access. Vivian and her men had tools that could easily break down doors and windows, but Megan had something they didn't: intimate knowledge of the property and years of experience improvising solutions under extreme pressure. The sound of hammers pounding on the front door echoed through the house. They weren't wasting time with subtleties. Megan ran to the kitchen and began gathering anything she could use as a resource: knives, heavy pans, cleaning products that could be turned into chemical irritants, clothesline, even the old fire extinguisher hanging on the wall. "Megan!" Vivian's voice cut through the wood of the door. "You're just prolonging the inevitable. Open this door and make it easier on everyone." Instead of answering, Megan dragged the kitchen table to block the back door. Her hands moved with automatic precision, each movement calculated to maximize her chances of survival. The sound of shattering glass came from the living room. They had broken a window and were coming in. Megan raced upstairs, carrying an improvised backpack with her resources. At the top of the stairs, she shoved a heavy wardrobe, sending it crashing down to partially block the access. "What the hell?" she heard one of the men yell from below as the furniture slammed to the floor. "She's upstairs," Vivian shouted. "Surround the house, don't let her escape." Megan headed for the master bedroom, which had a large window overlooking the back of the property. Down below, in the distance, she could see figures moving near the tree line. Richard, Helen, and Emma were hiding in the woods, but they were vulnerable. If Vivian decided to, go after them. A crash came from downstairs as the men began to force their way through the obstacles Megan had created. It was then that Megan saw something that completely changed her strategy. Parked behind Vivian's van was an old tractor she hadn't noticed before, and attached to the tractor was a trailer loaded with hay bales, dry hay, highly flammable. Megan looked at the fire extinguisher in her hands, then at the house windows overlooking the yard where the vehicles were parked. A crazy idea began to form in her mind. If she couldn't escape, she could at least ensure that Vivian and her men couldn't use the vehicles to pursue Richard and the others. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed on the stairs. They were coming up. Megan quickly smashed the window with the base of the extinguisher, ignoring the cuts from the glass shards on her hands. She aimed carefully and discharged the extinguisher toward the van's engine, covering it in chemical foam. Then she grabbed one of the cleaning products she had brought, a flammable aerosol spray, and threw it out the window toward the hay. "What are you doing up there?" Vivian screamed, her voice much closer now. Megan didn't answer. Instead, she took a lighter she had found in the kitchen and tossed it out the window. The result was more dramatic than she had expected. The hay ignited instantly, creating a wall of flames between the house and the vehicles. The van's engine, covered in chemical foam, began to emit a toxic smoke that forced one of Vivian's men to retreat, coughing violently. "You crazy bitch," Vivian shrieked, appearing in the bedroom doorway with the two men behind her. "You'll burn the whole house down. Better than leaving you alive to hurt my family," Megan replied, positioning herself near the broken window. Vivian was unrecognizable. Her blonde hair was plastered to her sweaty face. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and there was a homicidal madness in her eyes that made Megan think of a cornered animal. "Your family?" Vivian laughed hysterically. "What family, Megan? You don't have a family. Your mother is dead because she interfered where she shouldn't have, and now you're going to follow the same path." "How did you kill my mother?" Megan asked, trying to buy time while assessing her escape options. "It was easier than you think," Vivian said, approaching slowly. "Eleanor was always making those herbal teas for Helen. It was just a matter of spicing one of them up with something special." The confession hit Megan like a fist to the stomach. Her mother had been poisoned. She had died in agony, probably without understanding why. "Did she suffer?" Megan asked, her voice trembling with contained rage. "A little," Vivian admitted with casual cruelty, "but not for long. I'm not a sadist, Megan. I'm practical." It was that coldness that broke Megan's last barrier of control. All the pain, all the guilt, all the trauma of the past few years crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. She was no longer thinking about survival. She was thinking about justice. "Do you know what your mother's last thought was?" Vivian continued, clearly pleased to have found a way to torture Megan emotionally. "She whispered your name." "Megan," she said. "Protect Megan." Something inside Megan broke and reformed simultaneously. The pain transformed into strength, the fear into determination, the vulnerability into power. "She was right," Megan said, her voice taking on a dangerous quality. "I do need to be protected, from people like you." Vivian must have noticed the change in Megan's posture because she took a step back. "Paul, Mike," she called to the two men, "get her." But as the men advanced, Megan was no longer the same person who had locked herself in the house 20 minutes earlier. She was operating in a state of hyper-focus she knew well from the most critical medical emergencies, when every second and every movement meant the difference between life and death. The first man, Paul, lunged with the hammer raised. Megan dodged at the last second, using her fire extinguisher to smash him in the face with full force. The sound of metal on bone was nauseating but effective. Paul collapsed to the floor unconscious. Mike hesitated, clearly not expecting such fierce resistance. "She's just a woman," Vivian screamed. "A washed-up paramedic. Get her!" Mike advanced with the shovel, but Megan had spent years dealing with people in panic and despair. She knew how to anticipate movements, how to use an attacker's momentum against them. As he charged, she ducked and used one of the bedposts to trip him, sending him crashing heavily against the wall. Now it was just her and Vivian. "Impressive," Vivian said, still trying to maintain some composure. "More impressive than your mother. She didn't even try to fight." "Because she trusted you," Megan retorted, closing in slowly. "Because she believed people were fundamentally good. I don't make that mistake." Vivian pulled a knife from her boot, a long, sharp blade that glinted in the light of the fire outside. "You want to know how your mother really died?" she whispered, holding the knife menacingly. "It wasn't just poison. When she started to suspect, when she started asking questions about my activities, I had to speed things up." "Stop," Megan said, but Vivian was clearly lost in her own sadistic memories. She was alone in the kitchen making dinner. I came in to help, small talk, fake smiles, and when she turned to stir the pot, Vivian made a motion with the knife, simulating a stab from behind. The image of her mother being treacherously attacked while cooking, in the place she loved most, doing the work that brought her the most satisfaction, was too much for Megan to bear. With a cry of rage and pain that seemed to come from some primal place in her soul, Megan launched herself at Vivian. What followed was a desperate, brutal struggle. Vivian was smaller than Megan, but she was fueled by the madness of desperation. The knife slashed through the air dangerously close to Megan's face several times. But Megan had something Vivian didn't. Years of training in high-stress situations, reflexes honed by medical emergencies, and the strength that came from the absolute need to protect the people she loved. When Vivian attempted a sideways slash with the knife, Megan grabbed her wrist and twisted it with brutal force. Using a self-defense technique she had learned during her paramedic training, the sound of bone snapping was audible. Vivian screamed and dropped the knife. Megan kicked it away and slammed Vivian against the wall. "It's over," Megan said, panting. "It's over." But Vivian laughed through the pain, a broken, hysterical sound. "Over," she repeated. "You think it's over? Megan, darling, you still don't get it. I'm not the only one involved in this. Did you think I could do it all alone? Manipulate the will, arrange the accidents, keep it all a secret for so long?" Megan felt a cold knot in her stomach. "What are you saying?" "Dr. Miller, the family lawyer, he's been with me from the beginning. And there are others, a whole network of people who benefit from the redistribution of the Harrison family wealth." Vivian spat blood, but continued speaking with a malignant satisfaction. "You can stop me, but you can't stop all of us. And when they find out you ruined our plans, and well, accidents happen to people who stick their noses where they don't belong." It was then that Megan heard the sound she had been both expecting and dreading, the sound of more vehicles approaching. Looking out the window, she saw 2 dark pickup trucks driving up the dusty road, toward the farm. Vivian's reinforcements had arrived, and Megan was trapped in a burning house with a wounded homicidal woman, 2 unconscious men, and a network of conspirators closing in fast. Worse, somewhere in the woods, Richard was trying to protect a wounded Helen and a traumatized Emma, unaware that the danger was far from over. Megan looked at Vivian, who was smiling through the pain, then at the window where she could see the flames spreading and the vehicles approaching. For the first time since it had all begun, she wondered if her strength would be enough to save everyone she loved. Megan watched from the window as the 2 pickups approached, her mind racing. 5 vehicles, potentially 6 or more armed people, a burning house, and somewhere in the woods, her adoptive family in need of protection. The odds were overwhelmingly against her. But then Megan remembered something her mother always used to say. "When you're at the bottom of the well, look up. The only way to go is up." And that's exactly what she did. "Vivian," Megan said, tightly binding the woman's wrists with rope she'd brought from the kitchen. "You're going to help me get out of this?" "Never," Vivian spat, struggling against the bonds. "Oh, yes, you are, because you're my life insurance. Your friends won't shoot at you to get to me, right?" Megan dragged Vivian to the back window, from where she could see the woods where Richard and the others were hiding. The flames from the hay had spread, creating a perfect curtain of smoke for visual cover. "We're going down," Megan announced, using bedsheets to improvise a rope that would get them to the ground floor from the back of the house. "You're insane," Vivian protested. "My men will see. Us." "Your men are dealing with a fire and don't know exactly where we are. Besides," Megan smiled coldly, "I'm sure you know escape routes they don't." The descent was treacherous, especially with a wounded and resisting Vivian, but Megan managed to get them both to the ground undetected. The smoke was thick and irritating, but it provided the cover they needed. "Which way?" Megan whispered, pressing the knife she'd taken from Vivian against her ribs. "There's a trail. On the right side. It leads straight to the woods without passing the front of the house," Vivian admitted reluctantly. They moved silently through the smoke. Megan could hear the voices of Vivian's men near the main house, trying to organize a systematic search. "She can't have gone far," one voice yelled. "Surround the property." But Megan was already using her urban survival skills to navigate the rough terrain. Years of responding to calls in dangerous parts of the city had taught her how to move silently, how to use shadows and cover, how to think 3 steps ahead. When they reached the edge of the woods, Megan saw movement among the trees. Richard was crouched behind a fallen log, holding Emma, while Helen lay beside him, clearly weak but conscious. Megan made a discreet signal, mimicking a bird call she used to use as a child to call Richard when they played hide-and-seek in the estate gardens. Richard's head snapped in their direction. When he saw Megan approaching with Vivian as a hostage, his relief was palpable. "Megan, thank God, we thought—" "No time," Megan interrupted. "She brought reinforcements. We need to get out of here now." "How?" Richard asked. We have no transportation, my mother can barely move, and Emma—" It was then that Megan realized there was a piece of the puzzle she hadn't fully considered. Vivian had mentioned Dr. Miller, the family lawyer, if he was involved in the conspiracy. "Vivian," Megan said, pressing the knife a little closer to her ribs. "Dr. Miller, does he know you're here today?" "Of course he does," Vivian answered with disdain. "He coordinated everything. When you don't return, he'll assume the plan failed and try a different approach," Megan finished. "Something that won't directly compromise him." Helen, who had been silent, spoke in a weak but determined voice. "Megan, in the library safe, there are recordings. Your mother hid evidence." "What kind of evidence?" Megan asked, helping the old woman sit up more comfortably. "Phone calls. Miller and Vivian, planning my elimination, all recorded." Megan felt a surge of hope. If there was real evidence, concrete proof of the conspiracy, where are these recordings? "Safe behind Eleanor's portrait. Combination is your birthday and your mother's together." Vivian had gone pale at the mention of the recordings. "That's impossible," she muttered. "Eleanor couldn't have recorded." "My mother was smarter than you thought," Megan said. "She protected this family even after she was gone." It was then that Megan formed a plan. It was risky, but if it worked, it would not only save them all but also ensure the entire conspiracy network was exposed. "Richard," she said, "do you know this area well? Is there a safe place you can take Helen and Emma?" "There's a hunter's cabin about 2 miles from here, abandoned but solid." "Go there. Hide until dawn. Then follow the main road until you find someone who can give you a ride into town." "And you?" Richard asked, though he already knew the answer. "I'm going back to the estate to get the evidence and to finish this." "Megan, no," Emma said, clinging to her leg. "Don't leave me." Megan knelt to the little girl's level, holding her small face in her hands. "Remember the story your great-grandma used to tell about brave people who protect their families? Now it's my turn to be brave. But I need you to take care of Grandma Helen for me, okay?" Emma nodded through her tears, understanding with the instinctive wisdom of children that this was an important moment. Megan helped Richard improvise a stretcher for Helen using branches and their own clothes. As they were ready to leave, Helen gripped Megan's hand with surprising strength. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered. "You found the strength she always knew you had." Megan kissed the old woman's forehead, then watched her family move away into the forest until they disappeared among the trees. Now it was just her and Vivian. "And now what?" Vivian asked, trying to sound defiant, but Megan could hear the fear in her voice. "Now you're going to help me get home, and you're going to be a witness when I expose this whole operation." The journey back to the estate took 3 hours through trails and country roads, with Megan forcing Vivian to drive one of the abandoned vehicles they found at the farm. During the drive, Vivian tried several times to negotiate, plead, even offer money in exchange for her freedom. Megan remained impassive. There was a clarity to her purpose now that hadn't existed before. She was no longer just fighting to survive. She was fighting for justice. When they arrived at the Harrison estate, the sun was rising. The property looked different in the golden morning light. No longer the home of Megan's childhood, but the scene of a crime that had spanned years. Martha came running out when she saw the car approach. "Megan, thank the Lord. We were so worried when you didn't come back yesterday." "Martha," Megan said urgently, "call the police now. Tell them it's an emergency, and there's evidence of multiple crimes here." While Martha ran for the phone, Megan took Vivian to the library. The portrait of her mother was there, exactly where it had always been. Eleanor smiling gently from the canvas, as if watching over and protecting them. "She knew," Megan murmured, entering the combination into the hidden safe. "She always knew." Inside the safe, along with financial documents, was a small digital recorder and several CDs with carefully marked dates. Megan picked up the recorder and pressed play. Her mother's voice filled the library. Date, March 15th. "I intercepted another phone call between Miss Vivian and a man she calls the doctor. They're planning something against Mrs. Helen. They mentioned isolation, accidents, and changes to the will. I'm documenting everything, because if something happens to me, Megan needs to know the truth." Tears streamed down Megan's face as she listened to her mother's voice, carefully planning her protection, even knowing she was in danger. The recorder continued, playing intercepted phone calls where Vivian and Dr. Miller discussed in detail how to manipulate Helen, how to isolate the family from outside influences, how to ensure the inheritance was redirected. "That recording will never be admissible in court," Vivian said desperately. "It was obtained illegally." "Maybe," Megan agreed, "but it will be enough to start a proper investigation. And I'm sure once the police start digging, they'll find plenty more evidence." It was then that the sound of sirens began to echo in the distance. "Looks like our conversation is over," Megan observed. When the police arrived, followed by an ambulance and investigators, Megan handed over all the evidence she had found. Vivian tried to claim innocence, but the recordings were too detailed and specific to be ignored. Dr. Miller was arrested at his home 2 hours later, caught trying to burn documents in his fireplace. 3 days later, Megan was sitting in the estate garden, in the same spot where her mother used to tend the rose bushes. Richard, Helen, and Emma had returned from the city where Helen had received proper medical care. The old woman was recovering, well, both physically and mentally. The traumatic experience at the well, ironically, seemed to have cleared her mind, as if the shock had rewired her neural connections. "Are you going to stay?" Richard asked, sitting beside Megan on the garden bench. Megan looked around, at the rose bushes her mother had planted, at the house where she had grown up, at Helen playing gently with Emma near the fountain. "For a while," she answered. "Helen needs care, and Emma—" Megan smiled as the little girl ran toward her. "Emma reminds me why it's worth fighting. And after." Megan thought about the question. 3 weeks ago she had arrived here lost, traumatized, directionless. Now she felt different, not healed. Some wounds would take time to scar over, but strong, capable, purposeful. "After, I'm going back to the FDNY. There are people out there who need help, and I finally remember who I am." Emma ran up to them, her blonde hair flying behind her. "Megan! Megan! Grandma Helen said you're going to teach me how to take care of Aunt Eleanor's flowers." "Of course, sweetie," Megan said, scooping the little girl into her arms. "And I'll tell you stories about her, about how brave and kind she was, and how she always protected the people she loved." "Like you did," Emma observed with the profound simplicity of children. "Like I did," Megan agreed. That night, Megan was alone in the library, holding the last recording her mother had made. With trembling hands, she pressed play. "Megan, my dear daughter, if you're hearing this, it means my worst fears came true. But it also means you found the strength to fight, to seek the truth, to protect our family. I always knew you had that strength. Sometimes life takes us to the bottom of well, not to destroy us, but to show us what we're really capable of. You've discovered who you really are. I'm so proud of you. Take care of them. Take care of yourself. And remember, true love never dies. I'm always with you." Megan turned off the recorder and looked out the window at the moonlit garden. The rose bushes swayed gently in the night breeze, like silent guardians keeping watch over the family they had protected for generations. For the first time in years, Megan Davis felt whole. Not because she had won a battle, but because she had finally understood a truth her mother had always tried to teach her. True strength doesn't come from never falling, but from always getting back up. It doesn't come from never feeling fear, but from fighting on despite it. It doesn't come from being perfect, but from being brave. And as the moon illuminated the garden where her mother had planted her roots of hope, Megan knew she had come home. Not as the lost girl who had left years ago, but as the strong woman she had always had the potential to become. Some stories end with happy endings, others end with new beginnings. Megan Davis's story ended with both. In the garden, the rose bushes continued to bloom, carrying with them the silent promise that love, courage, and true family always find a way to endure, even in the darkest of times. And this time, Megan was ready for all the seasons yet to come.